there's probably some kind of evolutionary driver that to maximize the evolutionary fitness of the species, we probably have a low level feeling of inadequacy going on all the time.
Welcome to Share.Care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.Care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.Care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to the Shared.Care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own interest to help others. And today I have with me the wonderful and amazing Jeremy Nagel. Now, Jeremy is a software startup business developer, and he created Smooth Messenger and then he sold it. And now he's creating his second software business, Focus Bear, a habit stacking and productivity app to help people with ADHD and ASD that helps them build healthy relationships in the morning, to crush it at work, and then to shut off in the evening. Now, he's managed to successfully balance being neurodivergent and create successful businesses and bring harmony to his life. Jeremy, welcome to have you on the show.
Thanks a lot, Damien. Great to be on the show.
Yeah, and let's start. Can we jump in the Wayback Machine? And some people will remember this as a silver DeLorean that Doc Brown invented, and when you hit 88 miles an hour, you can travel through time. So do you want to jump in that? I'll hold on in the passenger seat. And can you floor it and take us back to a time that had a real impact on your life, that created, there was a foundation of what you're doing now and how that came to be?
Sure. It was probably high school, if we go back that far, the 88 miles per hour, back to 1997 or so, or 2001, I think it was. And during primary school, I'd had a pretty good time. I generally enjoyed school. Back then, social interaction was pretty simple, that we just run around and play octopus in recess breaks. And there wasn't a great deal of complicated social hierarchy or anything like that. Towards the end of primary school and the start of high school, it seems like the dynamic shifted a bit. There was less running around and more sitting around and talking. And I found that I started to feel a bit like I didn't fit in, and that I wasn't quite understanding the way that other people were interacting. And I really didn't enjoy year 7 and 8. I felt I had a few friends, but I didn't really feel accepted. And I felt like a lot of the social interaction seemed to be one-upmanship, that we'd be talking, but it was really just banter and trying to hang shit on the other person, if I'm allowed to use that expression.
It's your podcast. You can use what you like.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, that was basically my experience of high school. It did get a bit better in the later years once people were more focused on year 12. But overall, I didn't really enjoy it. And I felt like I was a couple of years ahead of my peers academically and a couple of years behind socially. And really saw that as a personal failing, and saw that as a reason that I almost shouldn't exist. I really felt quite self-flagellating, that I didn't see myself as having much worth unless I could fit in and could be like the other young people. And it was only, I guess, later I started to come to some degree of acceptance that I was a bit different, and especially when I got to university, and it's not such a problem being different because there's so many people that you can generally find a small affinity group, that I found people who shared similar interests, and it was very easy then to have nerdy conversations about things that I enjoyed. but in high school it didn't feel like that. So that's really, I guess, formative towards what I'm doing now, that I subsequently got diagnosed with autism, ASD Level 1, and that for me really explains the high school experience. That's why it was hard for me that teachers didn't pick up on it at the time, because I guess I was doing very well academically, and these days they probably would notice it. And I'm glad that in today's world, part of why I realized it is because my cousins got diagnosed, and that made me start to think maybe this runs in the family a little bit. And early intervention now seems to be a real theme in school, which I think is great, because the less time that you have not really understanding yourself, and the more time I got bullied a bit in high school, more of those experiences make it harder to come to some degree of self-acceptance and to find my strengths. Because that was another thing as well, that I felt like until I was about 25, I hadn't really found my sweet spot, either socially or career-wise. I got fired from basically 6 jobs in my early career, which was pretty destabilizing. I've found my way now. I've now found very fulfilling work, and I'm married, and I've got some great friends, but it wasn't that fun starting out.
So explain a little bit more, because you said here, I've taken a note, that you felt you shouldn't exist. That's a pretty powerful statement. What was that feeling like, and what do you think caused that?
Yeah, just that whole comparison piece of looking at other young people and seeing, say, when I was 13 and 14, that the other boys were able to talk to girls and I wasn't, and they were able to have free-ranging conversations, whereas I found it very hard to have even basic conversations. And as I got older, that similar comparison of seeing, mainly, I think it was mainly around women, that I felt very inadequate, that I saw my peers having girlfriends and going out and drinking and things like that, which I found, I felt like I should do it and I couldn't do it, and therefore I felt inadequate. And there were definitely times, I think towards year 12, where probably low-level suicidal ideation, not necessarily severe, and I didn't have a concrete plan, but I remember a time seeing a tram go past and thinking to myself, I wonder what it would be like to actually just run in front of a tram. Not a very good place to be in.
Yeah, and for the people listening too that might be having those thoughts too, please reach out to somebody, because I've found people will be really helpful and want to listen, and if they're not able to help, they will certainly refer you to someone else. So if you are thinking that way, please reach out to someone. That's why we have those Are You OK days and things like that, because we do recognize that, and you'll find majority of people out there do care. But tell us about that, this feeling, because you said you're comparing yourself to other people. You said you're doing really well academically at school, but then on the social side of things, you weren't interacting so much. What was it that you felt you weren't able to connect? What was the difference? And I can understand the whole talking to girls thing would be challenging, because a lot of people certainly a lot of young boys find that difficult. But what was it for you that just felt like there was something wrong?
It was partly that, and also I was doing well academically, but I was at a selective entry high school, Melbourne High, so everyone was doing very, very well academically. So I'd feel inadequate even amidst that cohort, even though, I got 98.5 for my ATAR. So if you look at it objectively,
so how does that,
I did very
how does
well.
that translate to feeling inadequate? You're talking to someone here who nearly failed English, so it's
Yeah,
your 98.5 is pretty high for an ATAR.
Yeah, but it's average at Melbourne High.
Right.
And I'd look at some of the other boys who'd go on to become doctors and high-level engineers, and I felt behind in that aspect. And so I was just generally feeling behind.
So it was really a comparison thing when you were looking at the people around you, closely around you, and making that comparison, saying, "Well, I'm inadequate because I'm not equal to them." Is that what it was?
Yeah, and really setting unrealistic standards for myself,
Mm.
Socializing with people that probably I shouldn't really have been socializing with. I was trying to hang out with the cool group of kids rather than the
Don't we
nerdy
all?
group of kids. And I would have been happier hanging out with the nerdier group of kids. Now it's funny, I'm friends with the nerdy kids and I'm not friends with the cool kids anymore.
But it's interesting, and that's why I wanted to explore that a little bit because, and I relate to that. There was times in my schooling where, that transition from primary to secondary is a big transition. I certainly had an experience when I was younger, before I even went to school, where I actually went to a different school very briefly for a term. So we moved to, well, we didn't. We went on a holiday to South Australia where my mum's brother lived. And for whatever reason on the holiday, us kids got together and decided we were going to do a child swap. So I stayed in South Australia, and their oldest daughter went back with my family. And so I went to school there for a term. So I don't know how that came about, but before I left in my old school, I was one of the cool kids. And I came back thinking I'm this cool kid. And all of a sudden, I was not. It was really a challenge to go. I come back expecting everyone to go, "Hey," and all of a sudden I'm the outcast, and it was really awkward, and so that's challenging to go through, and so I understand this concept that you're feeling left out, but you say the unrealistic expectations. What do you think caused you to have that unrealistic expectation that, hey, and because I had that coming back, I wasn't there, so I come back and go, "Hey, everyone," and that was unrealistic. What do you think causes this unrealistic expectation where we actually create a situation where we feel like we don't fit in?
There's probably some kind of evolutionary driver that to maximize the evolutionary fitness of the species, we probably have a low level feeling of inadequacy going on all the time.
Mm.
But yeah, I can't necessarily explain it. It did seem to get better after high school. So it may have just been the pressure cooker of year 12 and the environment where it seemed like we were almost pitted against each other, that say in the school assessments, the SACs, our teachers basically told us, you probably shouldn't collaborate too much because if you help other people do well, then that might decrease your own ranking within the school. That seems
So
like a
there was
bit of
that really
a
high competition environment, where, it was it was, yeah, it sounds like it was really difficult in that regard, where you can't work together, and everyone could be your enemy. Is that the kind of feeling you were talking about?
yeah. I don't know that I fully took that on. I think
Yeah.
it's something that sort of didn't really pass the sniff test, that it's going to be better if we work together. And I think I did collaborate in some classes, but I did feel alone a lot of the time and out of my depth. And
How did you then take that step forward? You went out and, I mean, because you've done some pretty amazing things. You started a business, sold it, started a second business, and you've obviously got married, and you've obviously got friends as well. So it's not like you're hiding in a bunker anymore. Even if I'm not being facetious there about hiding in a bunker.
you don't know where I
Uh,
live.
So, but what was it? Talk about how you actually found that way out to go, okay, you said, you had this feeling of, trams and wondering what that'd be like. What was that transition out of that? What helped you see the light that there was an alternative here?
There were probably two things. One was towards the end of high school, I started getting heavily into running.
Mm-hmm.
I started doing long distance running every day, and that turned into something where I was able to build some self-esteem, that I enjoyed the experience of getting fitter. Prior to that, I had spent a lot of time playing computer games, and I had that. I mean, on the one hand, it was kind of bad because I'd be up until 2 a.m. playing this game, and it didn't seem age appropriate. None of the other kids at school seemed interested in it. But it gave me that experience of seeing my character level up.
Yeah.
And I made this leap from, hey, if I can level up in this game, can I level up in life as well? And running seemed a very easy way to be able to adopt that mindset, because I could see my performance improving every week, that I'd go and do my 5K time trial and I'd try and beat the time from the week before. And I had this whole 52-week training plan mapped out, and I kept a very detailed log of my runs and my heart rate and my speed. And that seemed to help. I think both the feeling of achievement and seeing that actually I was pretty good at running and came fifth in my high school cross country. So there was some feeling of self-esteem from that. But also the endorphin high from running, I think, really helped pull me out of that low-level depression that I was experiencing.
Let's go back to the video game though, because I mean I've played video games and similar sort of thing. I have a son who likes video games as well, and I know one night I remember the next morning because I went to bed, but apparently he stayed up till about 3 o'clock to kill the big boss. And that was, and my attitude was, oh, okay, where's the good in that? And it's like, well, there's some determination, and what I want to explore from that is you were playing the video game and you talked about, well, you said, well, if I can accomplish this in the video game, I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, what else can I accomplish? Is that, so it sounds like you were finding some sort of gratitude or some sort of benefit in doing that. Is that what was that experience, and how did that feel?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I'd Oh, do you mean gratitude just for having that experience and having that realization?
Yeah, something along those. But it was finding a positive in what it was. It wasn't like, all I am is playing video games and my life sucks. It was, I can achieve this, is what I heard, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, and looking back on it, that time playing games was actually really formative to both my personal development and my professional development, because as well as that leveling up mindset, I also actually learned how to code through that game. There was this community of other people playing the game who figured out how to reverse engineer it, and we made
You did a Captain Kirk and you cheated, did you?
Yeah, pretty much. We figured out how to automate our characters so that we were writing code that would make our characters go around and mine coal and attack chickens and all kinds of things like that within the game.
Well, I think I know the game now because I've probably spent many times late at night playing Minecraft myself. So
it was RuneScape.
Oh, okay. Well, it wasn't Minecraft.
I don't think Minecraft was, or I hadn't come across Minecraft yet, but I do hear that Minecraft is now an excellent way for young people to learn engineering skills, and I think you can write code in there as well. So it may not be a write-off. My mum always used to say, "What are you doing playing that mindless game again?" And in the end,
what was that like when your mum said that?
It felt pretty invalidating and felt like she wasn't willing to come and explore my world.
How did that affect you?
Well, it probably pushed me away from my parents for some time. I think until I was about, from maybe 15 to 22, I tended to avoid my parents. But now we have a great relationship, but it might just be that typical teenager oppositional tendency that teenagers have to strike out on their own and do things that are different from their parents.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because so most people have been through that. I certainly had a similar experience with my parents where, there was other factors in there as well. And now have a great relationship with both my parents. But back then it was, it was quite difficult. And that's why I was wondering how that might have affected your journey as well. When you look at, you're at school and you're not feeling like you're fitting in, you've got your parents that you feel like are not validating who you are. I mean, you must have felt pretty alone.
Yeah, I definitely did. I guess there was the online communities that I was part of where I did feel some degree of companionship, but it felt a bit hollow compared to having in-person relationships. There was probably a bit of the comparison there as well. But yeah, ultimately the running and just finishing year 12, that was the antidote for me, that I started feeling a bit better about myself and overall had quite a positive experience in university. I enjoyed that.
So with the running, were you part of running groups as well, or just did you run by yourself?
I ran by myself.
Yeah. Okay. I was wondering if you had, started to create connections that way. Because when you talk about being neurodivergent, can you explain a little bit about what that is for people that are not aware of what neurodivergence is?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a very large umbrella term encompassing probably 20 plus conditions from autism, ADHD, dyslexia to mental health conditions, anxiety, depression, bipolar, and then also including some neurodegenerative conditions, say Alzheimer's and dementia. So quite a broad spectrum of the population, and not necessarily there's some degree of similarities, but also a lot of difference within that group. But the overall idea of the term divergent basically means different, and it's as opposed to neurotypical, where the majority of the population have brains that work in a certain way, where they're very wired for connection and socializing and having a broad array of interests. And then you've got something like autism, where there's less of a need for social connection, and there's a lot more focus on very deep topics that may be somewhat unconventional. And so that can be at odds. And I think nowadays there's a bit more awareness of the benefits of it, and some awareness of the social model of disability, that conditions like autism, they are a disability in the wrong context. That if I'm in a workplace, and that was part of why I got fired quite a few times, where there's a very strong insistence on being super organized and being able to follow the office politics and have quite a strong filter and not say things in the wrong way, then I'm going to stick out, and I'm probably not going to be able to do my best work. But in an environment where there's a bit more flexibility and there's awareness that, hey, actually, Jeremy's sometimes a bit weird, but he has great ideas, and he says things that are very honest and probably need to be said that other people are afraid to say. And I've found roles like that.
Because I can relate to that in the sense of there's times where I've said things where maybe I shouldn't have said that, but it seemed to be the right thing to say at the time. I mean, do we need more of that in society, where we have, rather than, especially now as things move forward really quickly, where we have that diverse array of opinions, and maybe it's not, maybe it's not liked as much because it doesn't fit in as much, but it helps us break out of the mold and think differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the mindset of neurodiversity, that we have this spectrum of human brains, and we're going to do better if we can tap into all parts of the spectrum. That we don't want to solely have neurodivergent people in a company, because that might be in some ways a bit dysfunctional, and we don't want to solely have neurotypical people. We want to have a nice mixture.
Yeah. And how do we find that balance, do you think, so that people can, is it just an acceptance, or is it a bit of listening, a bit of, just and treating it as a bit of fun maybe?
I guess that question might lead on to how do you recruit neurodivergent people, and how do you retain them in a company? Is that the direction you'd like to go down?
Yeah, that's it wasn't on the top of my mind, but now that you put it there, I think that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that question, Jeremy.
Okay. Sure. Well, on the recruiting front, there's a few things that I think work quite well. One of them is, if you're trying to hire people who are autistic, try and minimize surprises, which would involve sending out the interview questions in advance so they have some idea of what they're going to be asked, and tell them where they're going to be interviewed and who they're going to meet, so they can show up and it's less of a improvisational performance and more of a opportunity to showcase their strengths.
Yeah.
And the other thing that often helps as well is, rather than relying on people articulating their expertise, which can be a challenge for many neurodivergent people, instead let them show their work. So let someone bring their portfolio along, and instead of asking them to describe a time that they wrote some difficult code, ask to see their code. I'm a bit biased towards a programming environment because that's the sphere of work that I'm in, but I think you can take that analogy in many cases, that normally there are work products that someone can produce, And it might be hard sometimes if they were working for a defense organization and they're not allowed to export any of their work products. But often there's something that someone can show in order to demonstrate their expertise.
Yeah, because I mean, there is a big difference between, someone saying, what they can do and what they can actually deliver. And I know from my own experience of lost count of how many people I've hired and fired. But on the hiring side of things, I mean, if a CV was a reflection of what a person could do, we wouldn't need an interview. But in reality, people can say and they can say a lot of things. It doesn't mean they can do it. But what you're talking about is actually show what you can do and give people the opportunity to do that. So it sounds like a good recruitment policy anyway, just to allow that broader spectrum of real situations to come forth. So with that, when you look at that as well, because when you talk about the focus that's there, and there's so many people throughout history, when you look at them, and if you that have done amazing things, and if you look deeper, they probably were neurodivergent in some way because of the amount of focus or how they approach things. Is that, when you look at it, do you see that as well?
Yeah, so you can look at, say, Albert Einstein, and there's signs that he was probably autistic, and say Richard Branson is dyslexic, and you might think there's some kind of trait that would accompany many famous historical figures, that there was a reason why they stood out, that they were a bit different. And it's not to say that every neurodivergent person has superpowers. I think any discussion there needs to acknowledge that there's yeah, well, they may be, but there's also often kryptonite very close by to them. And so it might be that we have a lot more people who in the right environment could thrive and flourish, but because they haven't really found the right space for themselves, they're instead trapped in potentially a lot of autistic people are either unemployed or are in really menial jobs. And I think that's a bit of a tragedy.
So how do we, I mean, from that, because you went through that process in school, it was, you didn't quite fit in, which a lot of people did, and I certainly relate to that from my own experience as well. And then as the video games led to the running, led to, and then in university, you said there's a broader group of people and you're able to find, and I'm paraphrasing here, you're able to find your clique, you're able to find people that you related to. Is that something that we need more of? It seems, because when you go to school, it's a very small environment. There's less diversity there for you to be able to find that people. Is it a case of it is just finding your clique that you relate to make that easier?
Yeah, and to a certain extent, it's probably easier these days that there's so many subreddits and online communities that it's quite easy to find a tribe. And there's a lot more content produced by neurodivergent content creators. So I think there's more awareness and more acceptance. I don't really have the answer for how to make school as socially fulfilling for everyone as possible, but it seems like it's probably better than when I was at school, and that there's probably some emphasis on having personal development and social skills as part of the curriculum.
Because I wonder about that, and I look at, for example, my friends, and I know they're quite accepting of me, and I know I can be eccentric at times, and they're quite okay with that. And part of that too is I'm accepting of that too, that this is the way I am, and when I look at younger people that they get involved with and help, it's part of that process of going, hey, we are all unique people and we approach things differently, so that maybe we just need to listen and learn. Is that, do you think we're moving towards that type of world, and is it helpful to think that way?
It does seem like it's better than it has been in the past, and even say the plebiscite and accepting people who were LGBTQIA, that was something that when I was at high school, gay was probably most a derogatory term, and now I'd hope that it's a lot better in high schools, and I think we'll start seeing that in other aspects too, hopefully more acceptance of people who are different in some way.
Because I mean, I look, and I think in that regard I was quite lucky because My mum was really much, we had such a diversity of people around us, so it was very accepting of things that were not the norm. So, and I don't like the word norm. It's anyway. That's my little bugbear. Um, but it just seems to me when I look at it, and I look at my experience growing up, I had, I was child of the 70s, and I remember early on back then there was a number of airplane hijackings, and generally it was someone from Iran that was probably need to go to the beach somewhere. I don't know. I was too young to fully understand it, but I grew up. There was that connection of Iranians and terrorism and hijacking planes. One of my business partners now is Iranian, and it was interesting how that transition in my mind. There was still part of me that was thinking that was linked there, but I've had so much fascination in learning about the Persian culture. And I mean, he's a wonderful man. He's a great husband, great dad, has all his great things. But what I've also noticed is in learning about his culture and the way he approached things, it's actually made me stronger. It's given me more resources to draw from and be able to become more powerful in what I can do because I have so much more to draw from. Is that an approach that we can have? And how do we get people to think that way?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, there is the saying familiarity breeds contempt, but I don't think that's necessarily true. I think your experience of coming in contact with someone who was probably stereotypically bad is I've definitely felt the same, that there were probably groups growing up that there were stereotypes around people from certain nationalities being whatever the stereotypes were. I don't really want to perpetuate them, but it's something where now, I mean, I'm married to a Chinese woman, and so I have a lot of friends who are from different cultures, and I think we seem like in Australia to becoming a more diverse country, which is a good thing. I think if I know someone personally, then I'm less likely to start assuming that they're part of this weird other group and that I should judge them.
And is that, part of this, how, because the world has become smaller through technology, is that something we can use to create this greater, broader connection? And I've been fortunate. I've traveled to 44 countries as far as my
Wow.
last count. Yeah, and meeting people in those countries, it seemed to me when you looked at them, if you looked at the surface, it was all different. But when you looked underneath or just looked at the person, they all wanted to enjoy their life. They wanted good things for their kids, and they wanted to have fun with their friends. That was fundamental, and a smile was a smile. So you go, well, okay, if we all want that, how do we get along? And partly too, in my background, I'm a combination of Polish, Ukraine, and Russian, and I think I'm pretty well integrated. But I know people from those areas, and they all the same as well. They're not really into that bigger politics. Do you think we allow politics to get a little bit in the way of our thinking when we just need to step aside and actually look at the real people?
Yeah, and it's easy for me to do. I mean, sometimes I'll hear someone say a particular phrase and I'll start categorizing them on the political spectrum and then start mistrusting what they say. And I really have to watch that because I think, again, there's probably something evolutionary there that we're trying to categorize the object as, is it an enemy, a friend, or food? And
That's good.
if I try and avoid putting people into those very coarse buckets and instead see that everyone has a bit of nuance to them, and there's a bit of bad in the best of us and a bit of good in the worst of us.
And was it a case when you're at uni coming back there? How did you actually find your tribe and find that way to fit in? I mean, now because and we've had a couple of conversations now, but you were saying you had difficulty socializing, but you and I talk quite well. We never knew each other not so long ago. How did you make that transition?
I think a big part of it is that at university it was okay to have special interests that aligned with other people. So I did environmental science at university, and I hung out with other greenies, and I really enjoyed having conversations about climate change and about global health and development. And I did the leadership programs that I did, where just by virtue of the focus of that program and the focus of my course, I found people who had similar values. Whereas I think there was actually an environmental group at high school. I didn't join it for whatever reason. And had I joined it, I probably would have felt a greater degree of connection, having something important and shared to talk about.
So when you say that you didn't, well, we're not sure if there was an environmental group at school, but is that part of this process that we go through, that we're finding ourselves, that we even with the neurodivergence in there, we're still trying to find who we are, and we just need to explore things. And the point I'm getting to with that is how do we go through that process and know that it's okay to sometimes maybe we don't fit in with that group, but that's part of the process of finding ourselves.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. I think it's helpful to have some people who seem to like you and have some degree of similarity. And the more you have that, the easier it is, I think.
What about if we take that a step further with liking yourself? And because there was some, I can't remember, I don't have it anymore, but I remember reading research about people that really, really excelled. And they did a study on, had Steven Spielberg, Eddie Van Halen, some prominent business people. I think Donald Trump was in there. It was all, I think it was before Richard Branson's time. But what they found was they were trying to find what was the common factor, or was there a common factor between these people. And they had a massive sample of people and trying to find what the common factor was, if there was one. And I think it was about 280 different variables they went through. And then they finally found that what was common amongst them was that when they were very young, before 5, it was generally the parent of the opposite sex had an unwavering belief in the child's ability. So what that meant was if the child at 2 or 3 is gone, I want to be an actor, that they would have said, oh, you're going to be the best actor there is, or I want to be an astronaut, you're going to be the best actor. So that they had and what it was that belief that in the child's ability, not necessarily that they were going to be an actor, but that the child could do what they wanted really well. And now there's a bunch of, I've forgotten the lady's name, she's similar sort of research, whereas it says if you want to, if you want to reward the children, you don't reward their identity, you reward the behavior. That effort you did is really good. And by rewarding that behavior, that actually encourages them to excel more.
Is that Carol Dweck maybe?
Yeah, that's right. That's who it is, Carol. Yeah, so she talks about that. So, is that the case of how do we encourage people to have that focus when we're looking at it in those spaces, to go, hey, part of this process of going through is actually believing in yourself and saying, hey, I can do these things.
Yeah, I think that is very important, and I sort of downplayed the role of my mother before, but she was probably very instrumental in me doing well academically. That she was a lecturer at university, and now she has a high-level role in a university, and she spent a lot of time with all of the children at home. She'd take us to libraries, and we'd take home like 20 books, and I'd read them within a week, and she really nurtured that. So maybe there's something to that I don't necessarily remember what she said, but definitely those actions of allowing us to explore our interests and to go deep on things like that, they really helped. So having a loving parent in your corner is very helpful.
Yeah, because I mean, interesting that you mentioned that, because if we explore that deeper, and I'm relating that to my own experience as well, because I remember when I was young, I would come home from school and I'd have to do another hour to 2 hours of homework, where my mum sat at the table with me and my sister and we did more homework. And during primary school, I was exceptional. And then for whatever reason, that stopped. We were doing that homework. And I stopped doing study full stop because I didn't need to get good results. But eventually the work caught up and then went ahead of me. And then I started not doing very well at all. because I didn't develop the habit of continuing study.
Hmm.
But it's one of those things. So I was just wondering from that perspective, when we look at you, because you mentioned about, whether others liked you, and whether, do we need to have this foundation of liking ourselves first and trusting that we're going to find our click as we move forward?
Yeah, it would definitely be a nice thing to have. That's something that I had to do a lot of personal work on, because after university, I found a peer support group, and that was really what led to me having more self-acceptance. As part of that group, I learned strategies like meditation and journaling and being able to share my feelings with other people. And that's probably the point where I let go of some of the baggage and was able to be a bit more at peace with myself. Still a work in progress, but much better than it was in the
let's
past.
talk through that, because as I understand it, a belief is just a thought you've repeated over and over again. So, and if you're telling yourself, if a person's telling themselves, hey, I'm crap, I'm crap, I'm crap, they're going to start believing that. And then if they just change it and say, hey, I'm actually pretty good. And I'm relating that to my own experience, because there was times when I was younger that, I didn't think very highly of myself. And one day I just said, bugger it. And I made a little recording that I played in my sleep over and over again. I was single, so I didn't annoy anybody. And from there, that changed and in continuing to do that, it just changed my thought process. And now I just, think whatever it is I can do. But is it that easy? Can we do that? What was your transition of finding those things, and what's that work in progress you're talking about?
Yeah, great to hear about your experience there. I feel that it may be quite personal, the tactics that are going to work for each individual. That for some people, affirmations are going to work really well. Other people might find it hard to buy into it. But just trying out different tactics and having that overall goal of having self-acceptance, that I don't want to see myself as the best person in the world, because that's a bit egotistical, but I also don't want to see myself as the worst. I want to see myself as being able to rise to challenges and not being crushed by them.
Because the book that I'm just about finished writing, in one of the characters I wrote in, and the words, I think, therefore I am. And that really has profound, when you look at that in depth, what basically it's saying, what you think is who you are. Is that process that we really, as humans, don't quite understand yet, that this is something that we actually, how we think shapes us, and we can choose how we think.
Yep, no, I agree. And there's, I guess, some arguments as to how much should I be thinking, and am I getting into rumination and trying to observe the thoughts and be capable of seeing that I am also sometimes not necessarily the person who's thinking, that I could be also the part of me that is noticing that I'm thinking. And that's very helpful if I'm in an unhelpful thinking space where I've got some unhelpful narratives going around in my mental dialogue.
Yeah.
I can separate myself and say, I don't have to think that way. I can just be at peace. I can notice where my feet are. I can focus on my breath, and then it becomes a bit easier.
Yeah. Is it part of that awakening that you actually have the choice?
Yeah, definitely. I don't think I had that realization when I was a high school student or a young person. It would have just felt that the thoughts were inherently part of me, and that if the thoughts were saying I'm not fitting in and I'm not worthwhile, then it must be true. And it's great to be able to challenge it like you did.
Yeah, well, I now relate to that, because I never thought about it when I was younger. I had no reason to think about it. I didn't even know it existed. I didn't know that I didn't know, as they say. And then some awareness came, and all of a sudden a different floodgate opened, and there's a whole transition that happened there. We've talked for a little bit here, and as we were talking in the pre-show, it is a beautiful sunny day here in Melbourne. And so we probably, we should wind it up a little bit. But before we do, what would be your takeaway? What would you want people that might be neurodivergent or dealing with neurodivergent people I shouldn't say it that way, that interact with neurodivergent people. What would you want them to take away from this interview as to how to better foster relationships?
Sure. Well, I mean, there's trite slogans like "be yourself," everyone else is taken, and try and accept yourself. I find those kind of platitudes fall a bit flat. So I'll try and say basically the same thing, but with more detail. I think there's, in terms of, let's talk about, say, the social sphere. In terms of friends, let's talk about relationships, and let's talk about work, or try and say something in each of those areas. So what I've found personally in the social sphere, in terms of being able to interact with people in general, is it's really helpful if I can find like-minded people. And what I've found is that often the social groups that I gravitate towards, I think there's a higher proportion of neurodivergent people in there. And that's kind of nice, that I don't necessarily have to go to an autistic meetup, but I went to, say, an effective altruism conference on the weekend. And I haven't diagnosed people there, but I have met a few people who have told me that they're neurodivergent as well, and I think the proportion is quite a bit higher. So it's helpful just to find groups that align with my own interests, and not feel like I have to be into Formula One when the Formula One is on. I know it's not on right now, but that's something that I've never been interested in, and it's okay. I can find groups that resonate with me, and that's a great way to find friends.
It's okay. I'm a reformed Formula One fan, so I don't want
Okay. Well, I'm sure it's enjoyable. I've never watched it, so I wouldn't know. But
it used to be. I think my thinking changed. But yes, sorry, I'm interrupting you. But
okay. Yeah. So that's my take on the social situation. That find your tribe, and it doesn't have to be a diagnosis-based tribe.
Yeah.
But in terms of relationships, I've found with my wife, she, I believe, is neurotypical, and it's been a case of us being able to accept each other, but also for me to not let some of my executive dysfunction get in the way. Because, for example, one of the things that my wife finds very challenging is that I tend to get distracted while I'm cooking, and I have burnt many saucepans. And that's sort of a symptom of other things as well, that generally I'm not always great at remembering even to go and bring her tea and things like that other people would do intuitively. So for me personally, what I've had to do is set up systems so that I actually act like a loving, attentive husband, which I am, but I have to do it in a bit of a different way to someone who's neurotypical. So I've got a reminder on my computer and my phone that at around 5 p.m. I'll go and make a cup of tea. And then
that's awesome.
And also putting the bins out and doing some dishes, things like that I don't remember to do of my own volition, but because I care about her, I've set up systems so that I act in ways that actually show my care.
I love that you've done that, because I always thought there should be an app for guys that send little reminders of doing things, because to me, those little things are going to ensure that you get sex. And it's like, if you send a message when you work, honey, I'm thinking of you, and your phone goes off and you send that reminder. And then when you get home, she's like, ooh.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily my sole motive, but it does help.
Yes. Well, yeah, it's certainly not the sole motive, but it is a motive, I think, for most guys. So.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and then for work, in terms of, I think I spoke about how do you recruit people, and talked about the principle of least surprise when it comes to interviews. In terms of retaining neurodivergent staff and how to get on well with them, I think what I find really helps me personally, and there's a bit of research as well, if anyone wants to look up the Neurodiversity in Business report, they did this big study on what works best in terms of allowing neurodivergent people to play to their strengths. And the top changes that can be made to the workplace environment are flexibility, so allowing people to control the environment that they're in, that often background noise and harsh lighting can be really bad for concentration, especially for autistic people. So allowing people to work from home, or at least allowing them to change the intensity of the lighting, that really helps. And then there are other things like avoiding forced socializing, not expecting me to go to the Christmas party. I don't really want to go.
I didn't like the Christmas parties either.
And then the other thing that I find really challenging in the wrong environment is really large meetings. That in the past I had meetings with 15 people, and most of the time I'm not talking and it's not relevant to me. And I found I'd get distracted very easily in that environment. And now I've basically asked my manager, can we please just change this up a bit? Can we instead have it with just the people who are relevant? And then it goes a lot faster and it's a lot more engaging. And that allows me to play to my strengths a lot more. So now we just have 4 people in the meeting, and it's once a fortnight instead of once a week. So find little hacks like that that could actually allow neurodivergent people to bring out their strengths and not have to be constantly trying to conform to a neurotypical standard of working, where there's a lot of socializing, a lot of meetings, and potentially an inhospitable environment.
I love that. That's awesome. They're great takeaways for employers, for family, and for yourself. I love that you brought that to the table, and certainly wasn't trite. My comments might have been, but yours weren't. So,
well, I shouldn't downplay that, though. It's something that I have to reinterpret those expressions, because they're really true. Like what you were saying before about your thoughts becoming who you are, that is so true. And I have to keep on, I guess, thinking about how can I internalize that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's a process. It doesn't happen. Well, I think it can happen overnight, but for whatever reason, we hold on to that for some security reason. That's a whole nother story, and we could have a long conversation. And there's far too much sun in Melbourne today to be sitting inside. Jeremy, thank you very much for taking the time. I really, really appreciate the discussion, and I really appreciate, and I'm sure the listeners really appreciate, that you opening up and sharing that, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who may not have been diagnosed and may never get diagnosed, but have some sort of connection. And I know I fit in that category where I have a lot of connection to the things you were saying, and experienced a number of the things that you were saying through my life. So I really appreciate that you opened up and let other people know that, this is, there's people out there that are like that, and there's a lot more than we probably think.
I'm very happy to share, and thank you for hearing me and for asking those questions as well.
It's a pleasure, Jeremy. Look forward to catching up again soon.
Sounds good.
Thank you for being part of the Share.Care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.